The morning of my 32nd birthday, I sat in my car in the parking lot of Carver's Steakhouse for 11 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Not because I was nervous, not because I was running late, because I was doing the math in my head one more time, the way I always did, the way I'd been doing for 4 years, and the numbers still didn't make sense. My sister-in-law had texted me 3 times that afternoon asking me to grab an extra bottle of red on the way, and I'd done it, because that was what I did. I grabbed things, I covered things, I made things possible for people who had stopped saying thank you somewhere around year 2. I picked up the line. I straightened my dress in the rearview mirror, and I walked inside with a smile that cost me more than the Cabernet. To understand why that night broke something open in me, you have to understand what the previous 4 years actually looked like. My brother. I'll call him my brother because that's what he is. Married his wife when I was 27. I was doing well by then. Not rich, not anywhere close, but I had a good job as a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Charlotte. I'd just gotten my first real raise, and I had a 1-bedroom apartment I was genuinely proud of. I was saving. I had a plan. My brother is 5 years older than me. He's charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, uselessly, in a way that gets them out of things instead of into them. His wife, I'll call her my sister-in-law, is sharp-tongued and socially confident, and has a laugh that fills a room. They were fun together, early on. I liked her, early on. They got married in September. By November, my brother had lost his job. Not fired. Laid off. He was careful to say that. Always with the emphasis. As if the distinction changed anything about the electric bill. His wife worked part-time at a dental office, front desk, but they'd built their life on 2 incomes and suddenly had one, and a reduced one at that. They had a mortgage on a house they'd bought 6 months before the wedding. They had a car payment. They had the kind of debt that doesn't care about your feelings. I lent them $1,500. Of course I did. He's my brother. He said he'd pay me back in 60 days. That was 4 years ago. What followed was not dramatic. That's the thing nobody tells you about being financially drained by family. It doesn't happen all at once, like a heist. It happens the way water erodes stone. Slowly, imperceptibly. One favor at a time. First it was a loan, then it was covering their car insurance just for 2 months, while my brother looked for work. Then it was their Netflix and Hulu because my sister-in-law said she needed something to decompress and she didn't want to ask for cash. Then it was groceries, just here and there, just when things were tight. Then it was their cell phone plan, because family plans are cheaper, and I was already paying for mine. My brother did eventually find work, a sales position, decent enough. But by that point, the infrastructure of their financial life had quietly reorganized itself around me, and nobody said anything, because nobody had to. The transfers just kept going. I'd covered enough for long enough that stopping would have felt like the aggressive act, not the taking. My sister-in-law has a talent I didn't recognize for years. She never asks. She implies. She mentions in passing that the water heater is making a concerning noise right before the holidays. She says she doesn't know how people afford to eat anymore while standing in my kitchen eating my food. She calls it venting. It's not venting. My nephew, their son, 8 years old, is a genuinely sweet kid. I want to be clear about that. What happened at dinner was not his fault. He's 8. He was repeating something he heard. We were at Carver's because my sister-in-law had picked it. She always picked. I had suggested the Italian place I actually like, the one with the good gnocchi, and she had said, maybe next time, with the tone that means never. Carver's is a steakhouse. The kind with leather menus and a cocktail list that starts at $16. I'd gotten the reservation because she'd told me to. I'd called ahead about the cake because she told me to. I was holding the bottle of wine she'd texted me about when I walked through the door. They were already seated. My brother, my sister-in-law, their 2 kids. My parents had driven up from Raleigh. A couple of her friends I'd met maybe twice. It was a full table, and for one moment, standing in the doorway, I felt something almost like warmth. people who loved me, a restaurant that smelled like good food, my actual birthday. Then I sat down. The first hour was fine. The bread was good. My dad told a story about a raccoon that had gotten into their garage. My nephew drew on the paper they'd put down on the kids' end of the table. Normal things. Then the steaks came. My brother ordered the ribeye, which was $52. My sister-in-law ordered the filet. Her friends each got entrees. Nobody looked at the right side of the menu. Why would they? They never had to. I was cutting into my chicken. I'd ordered the chicken on my birthday at a steakhouse because I was the one who would be paying, and I was aware of that in my bones. When my nephew looked up from his drawing and said, loudly and cheerfully, the way only children deliver the most devastating sentences, "Mom says Aunt Rennie is basically just an ATM with legs." The table went quiet. My name is Renata. The people who love me call me Rennie. My 8-year-old nephew had just told a table of 12 people that his mother called me a cash machine in human form, and he was smiling when he said it because he thought it was funny, because that was the context in which he had learned the phrase. Laughter started on one side of the table. Her friends. A little, awkward social laughter, the kind people make when they don't know what else to do. My brother stared at his plate. My sister-in-law's face did something complicated, a flash of something, not quite shame, more like the particular expression of someone who is calculating damage control. My mother said, quietly, "Sweetie." My sister-in-law laughed, that room-filling laugh. "Oh, you know kids," she said. "They just say everything. They do. That's the thing. They say everything they hear." I put my fork down. I looked at my nephew and I said, very calmly, "Where did you hear that, buddy?" He pointed at his mother without hesitation. 8-year-olds do not understand subtext. My sister-in-law was still smiling, managing the room like she always did, pivoting toward some other topic, already reaching for her wine glass. My wine, the bottle I'd brought from Total Wine on the way over, $23, because she texted me 3 times. I leaned toward her just slightly, not aggressive, not loud, quiet enough that only the people immediately around us could hear. I said, "Let's see how funny it is when you pay." She blinked. I said it again, the same way, the same volume. "Let's see how funny it is when you pay." Then I picked my fork back up and finished my chicken. She laughed again, but it was shorter this time, and it didn't reach the other side of the table. I want to be honest about something. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do when I said that. I had been building toward something for a long time. I'd known that, the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds fully form. But I hadn't sat down with a plan. What I had was something that had quietly solidified over the previous 8 months, starting with a conversation I'd had with a financial advisor friend of mine named Claudette, who had said to me, very directly, over coffee, "Renata, you are subsidizing an entire household that is not yours, and you are doing it without any legal documentation and with zero exit strategy. That's not generosity. That's exposure." Claudette is blunt. Claudette is also right. After that coffee, I'd started keeping records. Not because I was planning revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was planning clarity. I made a spreadsheet. Every transfer, every Venmo, every grocery run, every insurance payment, every streaming service. I went back through my bank statements as far as I could. I annotated everything. Total over 4 years, $41,230. Not including my time. Not including the birthday parties I'd organized, the babysitting I'd done at the last minute, the vacations I'd quietly not taken because I was nervous about the cash. $41,000. In that same 4 years, my brother had not once offered to pay anything back. My sister-in-law had never once said we'd like to start contributing. They'd said thank you sometimes, in the way that people say thank you for things they expect. I'd also talked to my bank. I'd restructured some automatic transfers. I'd updated my beneficiary designations. I'd done quiet things that no one had noticed because no one was paying attention to anything except what was flowing toward them. The dinner ended the way dinners like that. Dessert came. My cake was brought out. She'd picked the flavor, chocolate with raspberry. I actually like lemon. And everyone sang and I smiled. The check came in one of those black leather folders. I watched my brother's hand not reach for it. I watched my sister-in-law become very absorbed in her phone. I picked up the folder. I looked at the total. I set it back down in the center of the table. Actually, I said, I think this one's on everyone. Silence. I brought the wine, I said. That's my contribution tonight. My sister-in-law looked up from her phone. Sorry? For dinner, I said pleasantly. I think everyone should cover their own. And the kids, between their parents, obviously. She stared at me. My brother stared at me. This was, and I understood it in that moment very clearly, the first time in 4 years that I had not simply made a problem disappear. Her friends quietly reached for their wallets. My parents, bless them, exchanged a glance, and my dad put his card on the table without a word. My brother, after a long pause that I let sit there without filling, paid for his family's portion with a credit card I had never seen before, which told me he had access to money he'd never mentioned. We did not linger over coffee. The drive home was the quietest I could remember. I had a specific kind of calm that I recognized from one other moment in my life, the morning after I'd finally made a decision I'd been avoiding for too long. Not peace exactly. Clarity. The following Monday morning, I did several things. I removed my brother and sister-in-law from my cell phone family plan. I called the carrier and had them moved to their own account. I changed the password on the streaming services that were under my login. I stopped the automatic grocery order that had been going to their address on the 1st of every month for 2 years. I'd set it up once when things were bad and apparently once had become permanent. I sent my brother a text. Not angry. Matter of fact. I told him I was simplifying my finances and these were the things that were changing. I did not ask permission. I did not apologize. He called me within 20 minutes. The call went about the way I expected. His voice started at confused and moved through several stages before it arrived at something that was supposed to sound wounded. I can't believe you do this without even talking to me. You know we're still getting back on our feet. This is going to really affect the kids. I let him finish. I said, I've spent $41,000 supporting your household over the last 4 years. I have records of every transaction. I've never asked for any of it back, and I'm still not asking. I'm just not adding to it anymore. Another silence. This one different from the restaurant silence. Heavier. Where is this coming from? He asked. Mom says Aunt Rennie is basically just an ATM with legs, I said. Your son, at my birthday dinner. He was quiet. I know you've been working, I said. I know things got hard, but they've gotten better, and you have a credit card I've never seen, and I am not going to be the reason you never build anything of your own. I did not tell him that this was, in part, about his kids, that I'd watched my nephew grow up understanding that certain people simply provide and certain people simply receive, and that this was becoming the world as he understood it. I'd watched that happen, and I had contributed to it, and I had complicated feelings about my role in it. My sister-in-law called me 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 4 minutes long and covered a range of territory. How hurt she was, how she'd never meant it that way, how my nephew was just being a kid, how family was supposed to stick together, how what I was doing was punishing the children. She cried at one point, convincingly. I listened to the whole thing. Then I saved it to a folder on my phone, because Claudette had taught me to document everything. Over the following weeks, she worked the extended family. I know this because relatives started calling me, an aunt, a cousin I like but don't see often, saying they'd heard there was tension, and asking carefully whether I was okay. She was building a narrative. I understood that. I had made a choice that inconvenienced her household, and the natural response was to make me the difficult one. My parents were the last call. My mom said she didn't want to get in the middle, and then was very much in the middle, listing the ways in which the situation was hard on everyone. I listened carefully. I said, "Mom, I have records of every dollar I've sent their household for 4 years. I'm happy to share the spreadsheet anytime you want to see it." She did not ask to see it. The conversation ended shortly after. What I want to say about the months that followed is that they were quieter than I expected and harder than I expected in different directions. Quieter. The family drama dissolved faster than I thought it would. She'd expected me to capitulate. That's what I'd always done. That was my role. And when I didn't, the narrative kind of ran out of steam. You can only tell the "she abandoned us" story for so long before people start wondering why a healthy household of 2 adults with jobs needs someone else to run their life. Harder. I had to sit with the fact that I had allowed this, not caused it. She had made choices, my brother had made choices, but I had enabled it, month after month. Because it was easier than the conversation. Because I loved him. Because somewhere underneath all of it, I had believed that my worth in this family was partly measured by my usefulness. That's not a comfortable thing to know about yourself. I am not someone who believes in clean endings. Life doesn't really offer those. My brother and I have spoken a handful of times since the birthday dinner. It's careful and a little formal in a way that it never was before, and I don't know yet whether that formality will eventually soften or whether this is just what we are now. I hope for something better. I'm not certain I'll get it. My sister-in-law and I have not spoken directly. I don't expect that to change soon. My nephew came to a family thing at my parents' house a few months later, and he ran up to me and hugged me exactly the same way he always has, because he is 8 and he doesn't fully understand what happened, and he loves me. I hugged him back, and I thought about the version of him I wanted to know in 20 years. The one who understood that love and money are not the same thing. That providing for someone and providing for yourself are both acts of love. That the people who give quietly are not limitless. I don't know if he'll learn that. I know I couldn't teach him that lesson by continuing to be the example. My spreadsheet still exists. $41,230. I look at it sometimes not out of bitterness, but because I need to remember that the things I minimized were real. That I have a right to the life I'm funding, that the money I'm saving now is mine. I opened a high-yield savings account the month after my birthday. I put in what I've been sending to their household every month. It's a different kind of math. I'm getting pretty good at it. There's a version of this story where I'm the villain. I know that because I've heard it. Through relatives, through careful phone calls, through the way certain people got quiet when I walked into the room at the next family gathering. In that version, I abandoned people who needed me. I made a scene on my own birthday. I chose money over family. I used to be afraid of that version. I used to soften everything I did so that version couldn't exist. That's why it took 4 years. What I've come to understand is this. The way you treat people teaches them something. Every time I covered a bill without saying anything, I was teaching my brother that this was normal. Every time I absorbed a cost so nobody had to feel uncomfortable, I was teaching my sister-in-law that there were no consequences to how she spoke about me, even to her own child. I didn't mean to teach those lessons, but I taught them anyway, just by showing up and paying and staying quiet. My nephew didn't know he was doing anything wrong when he said what he said at that table. He was 8. He'd learned that phrase the way children learn everything, by hearing it used comfortably, repeatedly, by someone he trusted. That's what I couldn't stop thinking about in the weeks after my birthday. Not what my sister-in-law had said about me, but that she'd said it enough times, casually enough, that it had become part of his vocabulary. That's when I understood that staying wasn't protecting him. It was showing him a blueprint. The hardest part of all of it wasn't the money. $41,000 is a real number, and it represents real hours of my life, but the money was recoverable. What's harder to recover from is the slow erosion of knowing your own worth. 4 years of absorbing the message that my value was what I could provide. That's not something a savings account fixes. That's something you have to choose over and over to unlearn. What I keep coming back to is Claudette sitting across from me at that coffee shop saying, "That's not generosity, that's exposure." She wasn't being harsh. She was being precise. And precision, sometimes, is the kindest thing someone can offer you. I think about the woman who sat in the parking lot of that steakhouse for 11 minutes. She was so tired. She was calculating the cost of the evening she was about to walk into. The literal dollar cost, because she was already doing that math automatically, the way you breathe. She loved her brother. She wanted the table inside to feel like what a birthday is supposed to feel like. She went in anyway and smiled and brought the wine and sat at the wrong end of her own celebration. I'm not angry at her. I understand exactly why she stayed as long as she did. Love makes people patient in ways that can quietly become self-destructive if nobody names it. The line between loyalty and losing yourself is not always visible until you're already on the wrong side of it. What changed that night wasn't the insult. It was the clarity. Something that had been building for months finally had a face and a voice and a room full of witnesses, and I realized I didn't have to absorb it one more time. I could just stop. That's the part that nobody tells you about setting a boundary. It doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels like stepping off a ledge and not being sure there's ground. I said 3 sentences and put my fork down and my hands were steady. But something inside me was very aware of how much I was changing. The ground was there. It was there the whole time.